Okay, a little bit later in the episode, I'm going to tell you more about the hormone fixer because I know you're dying to know. This little bad boy supplement that I created, if I do say so myself, is amazing at so many things, so many benefits. So it raises your natural testosterone, ladies, that GSD hormone. It helps with weight loss. It helps improve insulin sensitivity. It helps with anti-aging. It increases your own growth hormone, the anti-aging hormone that helps with the wrinkles and the stamina, energy, focus, brain. It also helps with your mood and lowers your response to stress. So you're just going to have to wait a little bit more. We'll tell you more about it. The hormone fixer. So this is going to be a game changer for you. And you can probably hear the excitement in my voice. The latest introduction, the latest member of the family to the fixer line is Metabolism Fixer. And this, oh my God, I formulated this just for all my people out there that need to lose weight, that need help in the weight loss department, that can't lose weight no matter what they do, that feel like they have a slow metabolism, and that might be thinking of trying all those peptides out there, you know, the Beverly Hills soccer mom drug of choice for weight loss peptides. Or even if you're on them already and you're like, man, these are really expensive and I'm still not losing weight, add in Metabolism Fixer. Here's what I did. I took the power of T2, which increases your basal metabolic rate while you are sitting there watching Netflix. You're burning fat while you're watching Netflix. I combined it with a very unique patented ingredient called Suppressa. Suppressa has multiple clinical trials backing its efficacy in reducing your appetite, decreasing snacking, and providing way more control over your food intake. It is amazing. We also see improved emotional well-being, just decreased food cravings all around, reduced hunger, and weight management. Add on top of that, we have green tea extract, we have purple forest purple tea extract, both of which affect the metabolism in a very positive way without the jitters of normal fat burning supplements out there from the 1980s and 90s, right? The ones that made you feel like you're having a heart attack. You will not have that in any of my supplements, thyroid fixer or metabolism fixer. But metabolism fixer, ooh, yeah, we kicked it up a notch. It is in powder form, so you can drink it through your day. It's going to flavor your water. We got orange crush and refreshing citrus. I love them both. It is going to keep you under control all day long. So you throw a couple scoops in your water bottle in the morning, throw a scoop or two in your water bottle throughout the day. You will have fat burning and appetite control the entire day for what? An eighth of a price of the peptides? Oh my God, you can't go wrong. So grab some Metabolism Fixer today. Please let me know how you do on it. I am super excited for you. Super excited. So we talk so much about estrogen all the time, all the time. You've heard good, you've heard bad, you've heard ugly. You've heard me talk about it in relationship to the thyroid. I wanted to bring on an expert today who wrote a freaking amazing book. And I love the title, Estrogen Is A Bitch, because sometimes it can be. And Kate and I are going to get into this in depth today. And we're going to differentiate the good estrogen, the bad estrogen, why you don't want too much of it. But let me tell you about my guest first, and then we'll deep dive into this conversation. So Kate Vazquez, just a dear friend of mine. She's part of a big group that I'm in, all with like-minded health professionals. I love her to death. She's a functional medicine physician assistant, founder of Radiant Health, and author of the book I just showed you. She loves empowering women to reclaim their health and vitality. Alongside her husband, she created an online course, The Estrogen Reset, and wrote a bestseller, Estrogen Is A Bitch, to bring awareness about estrogen dominance. In her practice, Kate teaches women how to naturally balance their hormones, as well as use their cycle as their superpower, reconnect them to themselves within, and tap into their feminine energy at their highest level so they can create a life by design that they love living. So, Kate, thank you so much for coming on and deep diving into this crazy topic that so many people talk about, estrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Amie. I'm just so honored and blessed to be here and to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. Well, I want to start off because I know we all have a story that led us into the area that we focus on. So, what brought you into diving into estrogen dominance, learning all about it, treating women? Tell us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so crazy because, I started off in Western medicine, as I'm sure you did, working at an urgent care. I realized after a period of time, I wasn't really helping people. And I was seeing the same people over and over again for a lot of the same issues. And they would always tell me, why am I getting sick all the time? Where these medications aren't helping? And I didn't have an answer for them at the time. And it was actually kind of frustrating because I'm like, I got into medicine to help people. And a lot of people I could help them, give them the quick fix and get them on their way. But there was a lot of people I couldn't help. And it was frustrating. But one day I came across Dr. Hyman, who talked about functional medicine, how it was the medicine of why. And I got so excited. It was like a light bulb moment. And I knew this is where I was meant to be. And so I dove into learning about functional medicine, got my certification in Institute for Functional Medicine, but I also had my own health issues at the time, which I didn't think were a big deal. Like I've always had high pain tolerance, just push through, and I didn't realize looking back, I had chronic neck pain, but I was like, whatever, it's tension, which it was a lot of tension in my neck from stress. I had a lot of anxiety, migraine since I was a child, developed acne in puberty, got to put on birth control pills, the anxiety from middle school all into my adult life. And then I also started having GI issues, so constipation and bloating when I was in college. So looking back, it was just like a domino effect, one thing happening after the other. And unfortunately, Western medicine, I didn't really go to the doctors except for the anxiety and the migraines, but a lot of times it's like they just look at each thing happening separately. But with functional medicine, I learned everything was happening all together. All the systems are affecting each other. So I really dove in and learned how to heal my body. But at the time, I was still on birth control pills. So it wasn't until about 3 years ago, I finally was able to convince my husband to come off birth control because we weren't ready to have kids yet. But we both understood and knew about the long-term impacts that birth control was going to have on my body. So I was able to come off the birth control and I was surprised what happened. My hormones went crazy. And I was like, I didn't know what was going on in my body because I had done a lot of work healing my gut. So no more constipation and bloating, really learned how to adapt to stress. So I didn't have the anxiety that I once had. But all of a sudden I was having irregular cycles and I never had this before, breast tenderness, severe menstrual cramps, and I even gained a little bit of weight. And I was like, whoa, what is going on with my body? I thought I did the work.
You to expect it. No one told you hey, guess what? When you go off birth control, it's going to be a roller coaster.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I did the work too to heal my body, I read Jolene Brighten's book, Beyond the Pill, to prepare my body to come off, my hormones still went crazy. But now looking back, I realized when I came off of birth control, even though I learned how to adapt to stress and I adopted different techniques to calm my body down, I was still in a toxic environment. I was working at an urgent care while also working the business, the practice, Radiant Health. I was kind of doing both at the same time. And it was a very toxic, negative environment. And I loved my coworkers, but I could see that with urgent care I was in, it became very corporate. They didn't feel like they were heard, and it was impacting them and it was starting to impact me. And I was just so grateful that I found functional medicine and was working my way to get out of the urgent care. But I realized, wow, it was a very toxic environment. Plus, that probably had an effect on my cells and my hormones. So coming off the birth control, they went crazy. So I finally tested my hormones for the first time. And I discovered I really needed to support estrogen metabolism because my body, my liver wasn't metabolizing estrogen properly. It was getting recirculated. And then my progesterone levels were so low from being suppressed for so long.
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yep.
Oh my gosh. It was an eye-opening experience for sure, because no one told me about what's going to happen coming off. And I also knew that, we still haven't had kids yet 3 years later, and we're waiting for that time. But I knew that when it came time, I wanted to make sure my body was ready. My hormones were in the right place, the nutrients, I wasn't deficient in anything, because I've seen a lot of family and coworkers, friends, when they come off birth control, they would have a miscarriage. Like right after they would come off, get pregnant. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? I didn't want that to happen to me.
Right.
So I figured out what was going on, discovered there was an imbalance. I needed to support estrogen, support my progesterone levels. Oh, and my testosterone too was like nothing. So I had to really support all my hormones, get those hormones back up. And also too, I was losing a lot of hair because my testosterone levels were so low. My libido was low. And all those were the after effects of birth control. So learning that, discovering that in myself, I started seeing the same patterns and same things happening in the clients I was seeing. And so I dove into learning more about estrogen dominance and this imbalance and the different ways to really help support the hormones. And it was a game changer, not only for me, but for my clients as well.
I love so much of what you said right there. I don't even want to leave that topic yet. Number one, I love that you said about the low testosterone causing hair loss, because I think that that's an overlooked factor when we're talking about hormones. I'm happy that you said your progesterone tag. I'm not happy that your progesterone tag, but I'm happy you said it. I can't tell you, I'm sure you see it too.
Yes.
The amount of women, 20s, 30s, 40s, with progesterone levels that of a postmenopausal woman. They're gone. There's no progesterone left at all.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to the birth control, sometimes people get sick of hearing it from me. Even my patients are like, yeah, blah, 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 synthetic birth control. Can you please explain how detrimental synthetic birth control is to the body?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first thing, it is what's called a xenoestrogen. And a xenoestrogen is a foreign chemical, and this is a foreign estrogen. It's not the same estrogen our body produces. And so our body doesn't metabolize this very, very well, especially through our liver. So anything that we are exposed to outside is going to add to the hormones. And we get it from sometimes in meat, conventional meat that is pumped full of hormones. So we're getting it from there. We're getting it from our birth control. These estrogens are impacting our body, and they're also attaching to the same estrogen receptors. And so our body thinks there's really more estrogen than there really is, because actually estrogen gets suppressed, but then we're getting in these extra, synthetic estrogens. And then what was crazy is like looking back at my timeline, my story, my all the issues I was having. I had gut issues, starting in college, but I was already like 4 or 5 years in on taking the birth control.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's not the only factor, but it is one of the contributing factors impacting gut health. And if you look at the studies and the research, it shows that birth control is linked to leaky gut. And leaky gut is when that intestinal barrier gets disrupted, because it's supposed to be very, very tight. It's one cell thick. It doesn't allow a lot of things to pass through. But things like birth control and Advil, which I took I took a bunch of Advil for migraines. So that on top of that, and sprains from, playing sports and injuries. That stress, the amount of stress I was under, because no one taught me how to help my body to calm down. Instead, I was put on Prozac in PA school. And of course, PA school is like medical boot camp. That's what I call it. Going 27 months straight through, constant test, like 3 a week. It was a stressful time of my life. And just everything compounding on each other really impacted my gut health. But I think, and also, inflammatory foods too. So we can't forget that. There's so many different factors, but yes, birth control is one of those factors that doesn't get looked at and addressed that impacts the gut health. And plus, studies also show there's a link between the development of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's with birth control. So women, if you are on birth control and all of a sudden you have ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, that might be one of the reasons why, in addition to everything else I mentioned. So that's one of the long-term impacts of being on birth control. And not only that, but birth control also decreases our liver's ability to produce something called bilirubin. And bilirubin is needed to make something called bile. And when the liver produces bile, it gets stored in our gallbladder. And there's actually a link to a lot of women developing gallbladder issues when they're on birth control. In fact, I remember having a client come to me on birth control with gallbladder stones. And she asked her doctor, could the birth control have caused this? No. I'm like,
right.
Did she not look at the research and the studies? Because it impacts the production of bile. And why is this so important? Well, because when estrogen gets metabolized, it gets metabolized in our liver first. So there's two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. It goes from active to an inactive form once it goes through phase 2. And then in phase 2, after it goes into inactive form, it binds to bile. And when it binds to bile, it then goes to our intestines, which is phase 3 elimination of estrogen. Now, a lot of women tend to have issues in 1, 2, or all 3 phases, which is not good because we are supposed to make estrogen and use it, but then also get rid of it. The problem is like when those phases are impacted, we end up reusing estrogen over and over again and not eliminating it. So this is why it's important that our body should be producing bile so we can bind those inactive estrogens so we can get rid of it in our intestines. But birth control impacts that ability. So when I discovered this, I was like, oh my goodness. And then women that are on birth control that already have gallbladder or develop gallbladder disease. And it's funny because gallstones were not seen as gallbladder disease, but it's like, yes, anything that impacts the normal function of the gallbladder is dis-ease.
And then they take your gallbladder out.
And then they take your gallbladder, which we need. And a lot of women have issues, digesting fats afterwards. Yep. It's like, yes, it stores, but it still is important for digestion of food. And that was the biggest factor. And also not only the estrogen impacting the bilirubin production, the progestin, which is the synthetic progesterone, also slows down the motility, meaning the ability for the gallbladder to contract when it's supposed to. So that's what creates that sludge. When the gallbladder is not contracting, things slow down, and then it's that bile forms with cholesterol and then forms with stones. So it's just so crazy and mind blowing. But unfortunately, we're not trained. You and I both weren't trained, about the long-term effects of birth control. It wasn't until I was pouring through the studies, like what were the long-term effects and what is it doing to our bodies? And then another thing that I discovered too, going back to like, why did I have low testosterone, is because it increases a protein called sex hormone binding globulin.
Oh yeah.
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 And I was like,
special talk on that. Yeah. That's a mean hormone. It's just,
yeah. And I'm like, what is this thing? This protein. Well, it loves to bind up our sex hormones, and it loves testosterone over all the other sex hormones. Yep. And so when I looked at my hormone, I tested my sex hormone binding globulin, and sure enough, it was high. And Dr. Jolene Brighton even talks about this in her book. Like some women, after being on birth control, because I was on it over 15 years, sometimes they have high levels and it doesn't come back down. Luckily, mine was able to come back down because when sex hormone binding is low, it actually releases that testosterone, and we have more testosterone available in the body. But when it binds all that testosterone, that's when women will experience the low libido and the hair loss. So those were the main things that I discovered, and like the long-term impacts that birth control had. And I was like mind blown when I discovered that. So
oh yeah. And listen, we get it if women don't want to get pregnant. I don't want to have a child either. Like never have, don't want to right now. So I get it that you're using birth control as birth control, but there's so many other methods that can be used as opposed to putting synthetic hormones in your body. That I'm going to add one more to the birth control effects. It tanks your thyroid. We also know birth control tanks your thyroid function. So now you have, again, it's that whole triple, double, quadruple whammy: low thyroid function, no testosterone, estrogen dominance, and no progesterone.
Right.
You're going to be fat, bald, holding water, and moody, and you're probably not going to sleep. Like that's the gift that birth control gives to you, but you won't get pregnant. Let's think of another way, right? Let's go down another path.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use the fertility awareness method, which, if you follow it to a T, it works. And I've been doing the last 3 years and still have not gotten pregnant. So there are definitely different ways, alternatives to not get pregnant. And it's so interesting to me, if you think about, and actually I didn't get on it to avoid pregnancy. I initially got on it for acne, so a lot of women may not necessarily be getting on it just to avoid pregnancy, but to control symptoms of hormonal imbalance, when instead we need to look at the root of what's going on. Why is this happening in the first place? And which I realized, like, the acne was probably from eating the conventional meat full of antibiotics and hormones and milk, and then, all the stress and everything that was impacting my gut, and then the estrogen dominance that I developed. So it was just like all these different things, leading up. I never, I don't think I had high testosterone. I never had signs of PCOS, but but yeah, all these things. I'm like, oh wow, because once I healed my gut, balanced my hormones, my skin has never been the clearest.
Oh, it's gorgeous. You guys can't see her if you're listening on the podcast. She's beautiful and her skin is perfect. So, and birth control is just another Band-Aid. Again, like you said, instead of getting to the root cause of why you had the acne. And then if you are a PCOS patient, guarantee you were given birth control as a slap on Band-Aid. And it's just, you have to get to the root cause, because the body is just a beautiful thing. It's so interconnected. So Kate, can you tell us what are the signs of estrogen dominance? Don't they kind of cross over a little bit with low estrogen, or am I confusing that? Can you tell us what are the signs people can look for? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They can, because what happens, well, actually, no, not with low estrogen, but when women go through menopause, because signs of low estrogen is more like, they have vaginal dryness, because we need estrogen to keep our skin plump, pain with intercourse, more frequent UTIs, yeast infections. Actually, you can get yeast infections with excess estrogen too, but also the hot flashes, the night sweats. So those are more like symptoms of low estrogen. But with high estrogen, or when women start to go through menopause, they can get a little estrogen dominance too, because progesterone is the first hormone to decline. So that will create that estrogen dominance effect. So a lot of those symptoms is irregular periods, as I was, talking about what happened to me. So instead of having like a regular, 26-day, 30-day, 28-day cycle, the cycles are just like all over the place. Like it could be 30-day one day, it could be 36 days, it could be, 42 days. So it's just like every month is very irregular. Like a regular cycle should be anywhere from like 24 to 32 days. And it can vary like 1 or 2 days a month, but that's about it. It shouldn't be like more than like 7 days between each period. So that's an irregular cycle. So if you're experiencing that, that's definitely a sign of estrogen dominance. And the next sign is heavy periods, because that's not normal too. Because what happens is when there's a lot of estrogen in the system and there's not enough progesterone to balance that out, the estrogen will really thicken what's called the endometrial lining, which is inside the uterus. And when we have progesterone should be increasing and peaking during the second half of our menstrual phase, which is the luteal phase. And so if that doesn't happen, we have that really thick endometrial lining. So when we finally do have our period, it's really thick and heavy. And sometimes women will experience clots. So normally women should change tampons like 6 or 7 or 6 to 8 tampons a day, but they shouldn't be completely soaked through. Like maybe the first day or two might be a little bit heavier, but if you're having like 3, 4, 5 days and it's really, really heavy, soaking through all your tampons and pads, like more than like 8 per day, that's not normal. And if you're seeing clots too. So that is definitely not a normal sign of estrogen dominance. The third sign is PMS symptoms. And that's because if there's a lot of estrogen in the system, it actually causes an increase in prostaglandins. Now, we normally have a release of prostaglandins, which are these chemicals. It creates a little inflammation in the body, but it also helps our uterus to contract so we can actually have our period. We want to release that endometrial lining so we can shed that and have our period. But when there's a lot of estrogen in our system, it increases more of those prostaglandins, which is why women will have those really severe, painful menstrual cramps. And then not only that, if you also have low estrogen, that's going to cause the mood swings and the headaches. So all of that.
All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff. And that happens a week before your period. So those are the PMS symptoms. Then the fourth one is breast tenderness, which a lot of people will lump into PMS symptoms, but I also like to separate out because extra estrogen will cause that breast tissue to swell, fills up with fluid. Sometimes estrogen can also cause cysts to form. So a lot of women with like fibrocystic breast disease, it's usually because of the estrogen. They're not metabolizing it properly. There's a lot in their system. And that's what happened to me. I just was having those tender breasts. Like it hurt to put a bra on. I'm like, I couldn't even like sleep on my side. I was just like, I didn't want to be touched, nothing. It's just like so tender. That's not normal. If you're experiencing tenderness breast, that is not normal. And then the fifth symptom was weight gain, and primarily in the butt, hips, and thighs. And that's because estrogen is responsible for the development of our curves in our butt, hips, and thighs. But when women are starting to gain excess weight, and it's primarily going in that area, that's definitely a sign of estrogen dominance as well.
Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah, those are like the 5, like I call them the 5 telltale symptoms of estrogen dominance. So if women have like 2 or 3 of those symptoms, it's definitely a high likelihood that you have estrogen dominance. But other symptoms can include like fatigue and brain fog, low libido. I talked about acne, even infertility are some of the symptoms as well.
Yeah. And so kind of circling back again with estrogen dominance, I know a lot of women are listening right now and they're going, but my estrogen wasn't flagged high.
Mm.
And it's not about that. Now, I use really a 1-to-20 ratio with progesterone. So if your estrogen is coming in, I'll just pick a number. Estrogen's 200. And based on the phase of your cycle, yeah, it's in the normal range. But then when we look at progesterone, again, like I said earlier, progesterone is that of a postmenopausal woman, and you're not supposed to be, then you are estrogen dominant. Is that how you look at estrogen dominance too? Or do you just look for that H that flagged high?
No. So if I'm looking at blood work, yeah, I will look to see, because there's not really a range like estrogen should be. But if women are 100, 150, then that's okay. But yeah, if I see like 200, 300, that's a lot of estrogen. And then I look at progesterone too, because then progesterone should normally be between 15 to 25. And so if women are like 10 and their estrogen's 200, that's like an imbalance.
That's still, yeah, it comes into the 1-to-20 ratio, but you're stretching it. You're at the upper limit. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly. You are at the upper limit. But also we'll look at urine testing too. And they actually have different lab ranges as well as far as the urine testing.
Right.
But I also too, just to make sure like it's not towards the upper end of the range, the estrogen, and the progesterone's not towards the lower end of the range. And actually, there are 3 different types of patterns that I'll typically see in women that can create that estrogen dominance. So the patterns that I'm looking at is making sure that progesterone is normal and optimal, and then estrogen is not too low and not too high. But what are the 3 different patterns I'll typically see is normal progesterone and really, really high estrogen, or I'll see low progesterone and normal estrogen, or the third one is normal progesterone and really high estrogen. So those are the 3 different things that I look at. It's like, making sure that those 2 are balanced.
Yeah. And looking at that pattern and then pairing it up to the person's symptoms. So if they're checking all of your boxes for symptoms of estrogen dominance, chances are they have estrogen dominant. I mean, it crosses over with some other things too, but when you're looking at the labs and pairing it up with the symptoms, I think that's the perfect way to figure it all out. Absolutely. So on here, we talk a ton, obviously, about thyroid and how high estrogen is one of the causes of elevated reverse T3, and it impairs the thyroid. But I want them to hear it from you. What do you find in your practice with estrogen dominance and its relationship to the thyroid?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so crazy because it's like I've had clients come to me with thyroid issues and no one really ever looks at their hormones. And I'm like, why not?
Crazy. It drives me batshit. It really does. Like, how is your doctor just testing your thyroid and not your hormones? But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And that's because when there's a lot of excess estrogen in the body, it's not being metabolized out. It actually increases a protein that binds up thyroid hormones. It's called thyroid binding globulin, or TBG. And so when that happens, it binds up a lot of the T3 or T4. I mean, it mostly binds up T4, but that's a problem too, because if it binds up T4, it's not converting to T3, but it can also bind up a little T3. So that is what can create that hypothyroidism in a lot of women. So that is like the biggest factor too, but also excess estrogen increases inflammation in the body. And so when we have increased inflammation, we're getting more reverse T3, which is the inactive form of T3. And then it's also increasing the antibodies, the thyroid peroxidase or TPO antibodies. And then it's going to lead into autoimmune disorders like Hashimoto's. So that's what I've commonly seen in women with estrogen dominance and thyroid issues. Is like, okay, if I see the high TPO or high reverse T3, let's look at estrogen and see where it's at, because, it's like, it's multifactorial. It's not just looking at one thing or 2 things. It's looking at everything. As I mentioned before, like functional medicine's looking at all the systems. And that's one of the things, like women will come to me, they're like, okay, I eliminated gluten and dairy. I did this, I did that, but I still am having the symptoms. Okay, well, let's look at your hormones and let's balance that. And that usually is what really, really helps improve their symptoms. Because if we can lower that inflammation in the body, lower that estrogen, the antibodies are going to come down. We're going to release more of those thyroid hormones, and you're going to be happier overall.
Yes. Yes. And with my community, we focus so much on thyroid. I think it's very easy for even some of my patients to go, well, I need more thyroid hormone because I don't feel any good. Well, okay, let's look at your hormones. And sometimes testosterone will be in the tank, estrogen will be high, progesterone will be in the tank. And I go, well, your thyroid looks great, but all this over here, the hormone panel, no, not so much. So we fix these, then your optimized thyroid will give you a bang for its buck. It will give you an applause for being optimized because you won't have the messed up hormones over here creating the same symptoms and masking. And everybody thinks, well, it must be my thyroid. Well, no, hormones too. Let's remember the hormones, doctors and patients. Let's remember the hormones.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like the fatigue, the brain fog, the weight gain. A lot of people think thyroid, but it's the hormones too. And the hair loss. Yeah, can't forget the hair loss.
And the hair loss, which plagues so many women. Yeah. So then where do I want to go next? There's so many things going through my mind that I want to talk to you about. What's the main cause? What throws estrogen off to get it in balance? I mean, we talked about the xenoestrogens. That's kind of the external, but what else are you seeing?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much to talk about the xenoestrogens too. But yeah, I mean the biggest. Yeah, there's so many different things. I mean, the first thing that I always like to look at is the gut health. I mean, even Hippocrates, a physician thousands of years ago, once said all disease begins in the gut. And it's so crazy to think about, like, he said that thousands of years ago. He was onto something. Yet we in our Western world have really forgotten to look at the gut. But thank goodness for functional medicine, because we actually look into the gut. Right. And that was the first thing I worked on myself. And why is the gut so important? Well, because in the gut, I'm sure everyone's heard of the microbiome, or if you haven't yet, is all these trillions of microorganisms in the gut, a lot of bacteria, and sometimes, yes, even yeast and parasites and things, but they should be living in community. Like, one should not be taking over. So think of like an Indian tribe, like everybody should be living in community. And if one decides to come in and attack and take over, that is what creates dysbiosis. And the reason why this is important, because we actually have gut bacteria called this estrobolome. Like, their role is to help estrogen get estrogen metabolized in the gut. And so when a certain bacteria or parasite or yeast starts to take over and creates this dysbiosis, it actually really hurts that estrobolome. And so estrogen is not able to be metabolized properly out of the gut. And we also have this enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which it's supposed to It's supposed to like hang out and just kind of like go undercover and not really do anything. But when we get this dysbiosis, now all of a sudden it gets increased in our gut. And this is a problem because when estrogen, remember, goes through the liver, goes from active to its inactive form, binds to bile, goes to the gut. Now all of a sudden this beta-glucuronidase says, oh no, wait a second, let me make you active again. And then it gets recirculated back in the body, because now the body's like, oh, you're not ready to get eliminated. Let's reuse you and, get you back in. So that's a problem. And it's crazy looking at when I did the gut testing, I had that dysbiosis. I had a lot of bad bacteria. Actually, it was growing into my small intestines. Okay. So something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. So I had SIBO because I had the bloating, the constipation, which are those common symptoms associated with SIBO. So I had to really work on removing inflammatory foods, healing my gut lining, because remember, birth control really impacts the gut lining, causes that leaky gut, right, and put in the good bacteria back in. So, and also support digestion of my food, because I wasn't digesting food properly. Mm-hmm. So there was just so many different things that I had to do to really optimize my gut health. And I had those elevated beta-glucuronidase levels. And so the way to get those levels back down is to get that good bacteria back in and get rid of those bad gut bugs. So gut health is so important, because it really plays a huge role in estrogen metabolism. It's phase 3. So that's the first thing I look at. And there's so many things that can impact that, which I've already covered, the medications, the stress, the toxins, even heavy metals, which I actually I was eating a lot of tuna at the time. And they say, once a week is okay. But yeah, once a week, it does add up.
Yeah.
Plus there's so many, we get exposed to mercury in our environment, and there's so many different sources, but yeah, I had high levels of mercury. So I had to like detox my body to get rid of that. So gut health is really, really important. And then stress, I mentioned that because remember, I was in a very toxic environment at the urgent care I was working at. Also the mindset. So like, when it comes to stress, there's different types of stress. There's physical stress, which is like if we get an injury or we go through surgery, something physical that happens to the body. There's also chemical stress when we're exposed to toxins and chemicals, radiation, and then there's mental emotional stress. And I've had a lot of people tell me like, oh, I'm not stressed because everything's good in their personal life and their work life. But I'm like, okay, but what's going on in here?
Right.
The mental stress, because yes, we may feel calm, but we talk negatively to ourselves. Like I'm guilty of that. We have 70,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of those thoughts are negative. And when I heard that statistic, I was like, oh my gosh. But then I realized I was like, oh, wow, I do say a lot of bad things about, to myself. And, because I hold myself to high standards. So if something doesn't happen and, I tend to beat myself up, but that's not good. That's not good because our cells are listening. They're responding to our thoughts. And there's a lot of books out there that talk about this. So, stress was a big thing. And, being in a toxic, negative environment, listening to negativity of the coworkers around me was impacting my body at a cellular level. And also, I learned that I needed to also help calm my body down because my body was constantly in a sympathetic state, because we have two different types of systems. We have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And our bodies are not meant to be in a sympathetic, which is that fight or flight state, like 24/7. But unfortunately, in our modern day society, that's what happens. We get into this sympathetic state, drives up cortisol, drives up glucose, increases inflammation in our body. And then, of course, it lowers our progesterone, and then it creates this estrogen dominant. So, and then it impacts the thyroid. So, I, that was like the biggest thing, is just like learning to help my body to calm down, doing yoga, meditation, deep breathing. So I started doing these things. And then also a lot of mindset work, because I'm also type A, perfectionist.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
And I really had to learn how to like let things go, stop taking things personally, and realizing like life is happening for me. It's not happening to me. Right. And that was such a huge shift for me. And so, I challenge everyone, like, if you're in a toxic environment with like relationships, and definitely like get out of that, because that's impacting your body. Looking at your mindset, tuning into the thoughts about yourself, because that's also impacting your body at a cellular level. But also we want to get our bodies out of that chronic sympathetic state. And that's another thing, like things that we're constantly, met with like so many demands, and, have to get this done and do this, and constantly go throughout the day. And another thing that was happening too, like I was go from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, and I wasn't calming my body down either. So what was a game changer for me was a bedtime routine, just like winding down an hour before bed. And that just like really helped to calm my body, calm inflammation as well. So so stress is a huge, huge factor. And then the toxins. So I want to come back into the toxins, because when I learned about functional medicine and discovering all the toxins that were present, I was like, just mind blown. In fact, I looked at a study the Environmental Working Group had done, and it said women use 12 products on average per day and are exposed to 168 chemicals. And I was like, what?
That's before they leave the house.
That's before you leave the house. Yeah, exactly. Before you get in contact with the exhaust and the pollution and who knows what else outside. So I was just like, oh my goodness. When I saw the statistic, I ran to my bathroom and just like looking at all the products I was using and counting all the ingredients. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm using more than 100 ingredients, putting them on my body. And the products like Neutrogena and Maybelline and Lysol and Clorox, like all these products that are heavily marketed, they're destroying our hormones. They're called endocrine disruptors because of those xenoestrogens. And even the makeup. Yeah, the makeup I was using, the shampoo, and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, I have a toxic home and I needed to get rid of everything. But then it was very overwhelming, because I'm like, I'm going to have to get rid of everything, but it's way too expensive, to get rid of everything in the home. So I started replacing one thing at a time.
Exactly.
And over time, we finally have better products in our home, but not just the products we're using on our body, but, all in the household cleaning products, but the stuff in our kitchen,
Yep.
like I was using plastic spoons to cook my food and the nonstick cookware and the plastic, warming my food in plastic containers and drinking out
Yep.
water bottles. And, all these things, as you know, contain the BPA, the bisphenol A. So it impacts not only thyroid, but it
Yep.
also contributes to the estrogen dominance as well. So yeah, the toxins in the environment is huge. I mean, we talked about birth control. That's another cause of estrogen dominance. Also histamines too. And this was something too that I ended up discovering on my journey, is that a lot of my clients were getting better, but there was a handful that just weren't getting better, even though I was working on the gut and balancing their hormones and helping them to adapt to stress. They just still weren't getting better. But then I realized a lot of them were very sensitive. They were sensitive to a lot of things in their environment, the products that they were using, allergies. And I was like, oh, or having rashes. And I'm like, I learned about histamine. So I started looking into it and testing them. A lot of them, the histamine would come back really high. Now, there's a few that didn't come back high. So yes, it's a helpful test, but doesn't necessarily rule it out.
Yep.
Definitely, if you are sensitive to everything, look into histamines, because once I pulled out histamine foods and gave them some natural antihistamine supplements, it was like 360 change. It was a game changer for them. They went from having painful ovulation, really painful periods, the mood swings, the anxiety, the irritability, to having painless periods. They didn't have the pain around ovulation anymore, and they were calmer. They were able to handle things a lot better in their life. And it was just so crazy how something so simple really made a huge difference, because histamines and estrogen actually attach to the same receptor, which is H1. And we have histamine receptors in our reproductive organs. So if we understand that, it's there's a lot of histamines in our body. Estrogen also increases histamine, and then histamine also causes more estrogen to be produced as well. So it ends up becoming this vicious cycle. So that was a missing link that I discovered in a lot of my clients, which also contributed to estrogen dominance.
So basically, there's a whole lot of things out there that are contributing to estrogen dominance.
Yes. Yeah. And because there's so many, I realized estrogen dominance this is why it's so common, and why 80 to 90% of the women that I saw had it.
So what can people do about it? That's the big question on everybody's mind. I know they're asking about DIM, they're asking about different supplements. So what can be done about estrogen dominance?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is to, if you have the opportunity, work with someone to look at your gut health. But if not, what you want to do is figure out what are the foods that you're sensitive to that's affecting your gut, but also pulling out inflammatory processed foods, anything that's packaged, a lot of, processed sugar, anything that has processed sugar. I'd start with removing gluten and dairy if you haven't already, anything to really help support the gut health. And then taking probiotics, increasing fermented foods to really help promote that healthy gut bacteria. However, I always say be careful, because if you have an overgrowth of bacteria like I had in the gut, or a histamine issue, if you take probiotics and eat fermented foods, that actually can make you feel worse. So that's another sign that there's issues in the gut. So yes, those things are good, but sometimes it's best to just get the gut checked, work on healing the gut. Because now that I got rid of that, I can eat fermented foods and take probiotics, and I'm perfectly fine. But yeah, it's really focusing on the gut health. And two is also getting rid of all the toxics in your home. So you really want to reduce the toxic burden as much as possible. And I get it. When I learned about the toxins, I'm like, I think it would just be best to live in a bubble, or go live on an island and make everything from homemade, that's homemade and scratch. But I realized, okay, that's not realistic. Yeah. So start swapping things out one at a time. And I recommend a couple apps. Environmental Working Group is great. You can search the Skin Deep database online. They also have an app, Healthy Living, but also two apps that I love is Think Dirty and Yuka, YUKA, because it has a little scanner in it. Yeah. And you can scan all the products in your home. So it'll give you a rating if it's clean or dirty. And then you can go to the store and scan all the products in the store to find a better alternative. So I recommend just start swapping things out one at a time. Start with your toothpaste, start with your shampoo, your soap, And then eventually you can go to like your detergent and all the household cleaning products. So start swapping things out one at a time. And those apps are super, super helpful. And then creating a self-care routine, because that was so, so important for me. So instead of waking up and like go, 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 I have a little self-care routine that I do in the morning. That's like yoga and meditation and deep breathing. And then I have an hour before I go to bed where I start winding down, whether it's like taking an Epsom salt bath, I dim the lights, read a book, drink some chamomile tea. So I do things to calm my body in the morning. And when I don't do that, I feel way more on edge and more anxious and stressed through the day. But when I do my self-care routine, I can show up in a much calmer and confident state. So self-care is going to be huge. And then you don't even have to do it for long. Even if it's like 10, 15 minutes, makes a huge difference than not doing it at all. So I definitely recommend doing a self-care routine. Also, really focusing on the nutrients too. So we need specific nutrients in certain foods, like cruciferous vegetables, for example, are really good to really help support estrogen metabolism and helps phase 1 and phase 2 of estrogen metabolism. Also, leafy greens contain a lot of B vitamins to help phase 2 of estrogen metabolism. Red, orange foods, so fruits and vegetables like peppers and strawberries, are really good to help with progesterone production because it contains vitamin C. Also green like broccoli, leafy greens also contain a lot of vitamin C as well. So you want to load up on foods high in vitamin C. B vitamins, B6 is also important for progesterone production. I also love seed cycling. That is like one of my favorite ways because food is medicine, and it really helped to get my cycles regular again after I came off of birth control. And the seeds, they're so simple, but are just packed with healthy fats and so many vitamins and minerals to support estrogen metabolism and production in the first half of the menstrual phase, and then progesterone production and continue with estrogen metabolism in the second half of the phase. And so the first 2 weeks, I always recommend grinding up flax and pumpkin seeds. And then the second 2 weeks, so basically every 14 weeks, you're alternating seeds. So the second 14 weeks, 14 days, you're going to grind up sesame and sunflower seeds. So you're going to do that every 2 weeks. And that's really, really helpful to support your hormones.
And just use them daily, every single day, use them on whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because even if you're not cycling, you're going into menopause, you may not be able to follow your menstrual cycle, but even if you consume those seeds, it's going to really help support your hormones as well. But yeah, as far as the supplements, so yes, there's a lot of, if you Google, there's a lot of research and a lot of blogs saying take DIM for estrogen dominance, but you have to be careful because yes, DIM definitely helped me, but that's because I looked at my estrogen metabolism, looking at phase 1, phase 2, because not everyone needs DIM. In fact, I've done tests and I look at some women have optimal phase 1 support, so they actually don't need DIM, or they need support with phase 1 and phase 2. So if you're not supporting phase 2, what happens is those hormones get stuck in phase 2 and actually makes you feel worse. Okay. And I've had a lot of women come to me. They're like, yeah, I took DIM and I had headaches and really bad cramps. I'm like, oh, well, let's look at what's going on. Yeah. And that's because the other pathways 2 and 3 weren't supported. So yes, DIM is great. It's helpful, but don't take it without testing first and working with a practitioner who can provide you those recommendations, because you can actually feel a lot worse and really affect your estrogen metabolism if you're not careful. But B vitamins are also really important for phase 2. Broccoli sprouts also help with phase 2. You can eat them, but you can also take them in supplement form as well. As for progesterone, I talked about vitamin C. So sometimes taking in extra vitamin C can really help progesterone production, B6. So those are the common supplements that I usually recommend. But again, see a practitioner, get testing to see if you really need these and which ones you need support with.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Kate. I want you to tell everyone, this has been a fantastic talk.
Awesome.
And it just, I know it's going to land home with so many women, many of my women listeners. So can you tell everyone, and we'll have this in the show notes, but can you tell everyone where they can find you? And I know you are giving our audience amazing gift. It's a free PDF version of your book. Now I have to say it is on Audible. Now I actually read a book. That's big for me because I have no time, but I was on a plane multiple times, Kate. So that's how I got your book in. But now it's on Audible too. So there's no excuse. If you don't have time, you can get on Audible. So can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone can find me on yourradianthealth.com. That's my website. Also, I'm on Instagram primarily. It's Kate Vazquez _PA. So you can definitely find me there if you have any questions, definitely send me a DM. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn, but like I said, I'm definitely more on Instagram. And as far as the book, yeah, it is on Amazon. I personally love the physical book because I like to highlight and underline.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of the women do. They make their notes, they highlight, they fold the pages. Yeah, do whatever. Because my goal was to really provide it in a format that was easy to understand, that's digestible, and give you simple steps to take away at the end of the book. And there's so many resources too in the book, but also online as well. So you definitely want to take advantage of that. And yeah, it's in many forms. It's paperback, hardcover, Kindle, and audio version because a lot of women are on the go like yourself.
Yeah.
And I knew the audio version was going to be helpful for those women as well. But yeah, also I created a quiz. It's the Estrogen Dominance quiz. So if you're not sure if you have estrogen dominance or not, you definitely want to take the quiz, and then we can go from there and just explore, and you can get more information from the book as well.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Well, Kate, thank you so much for your time today. This has been so helpful for everyone. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I wish you luck in your book ventures. I'm sure there's going to be another one coming out eventually.
Oh, yeah.
No pressure, but down the road, another.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me today. And yeah, there is definitely going to be another book. I have a feeling it's going to be on mindset, but we'll see. We'll see what happens when it comes up.
All right, Kate, thank you so much once again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So now that you've heard all about the hormone fixer, I'm going to give you a challenge. If you actually listened to this podcast all the way to the end and you're still listening, you can use the code thyroidfix10, 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 and get 10% off my store. This is only for people that listened all the way to the end. I want to know what you think about my products. Make sure you let me know. Love y'all.